What's up, y'all? This is Dr. Craig Waleed, your host, here on the Prison to Promise podcast, where I explore strategies formerly incarcerated people use to avoid returning to prison. To kick off this first episode, I'm going to set the tone by sharing my experiences with the criminal legal system, prison, community reentry, and the strategies I use to not only avoid a return trip to prison, but to also turn my life around, going from prison to promise. So I'm from a place in Western New York, about 45 minutes east of Buffalo, called Rochester. I was born to a single parent mother. My father was a no-show. We lived on the southwest side of the city of Rochester. Prior to my birth, my mother had already been married and divorced, and she already had 3 kids. My 2 older brothers, who were 14 and 15 years old, and my big sister, who was 13 years old at the time. My sister did a lot to help my mother raise me and take good care of me for the first 3 or 4 years of my life. But after that, my sister moved out and started doing her own thing. And so as a result, my mother had to entrust my care to other people. Some of the people that looked out for me were the neighbors, or I'm sure she paid them to care for me. They were the neighbors, and they did a child care um, service in the community, in the neighborhood. And then sometimes um, our cousins who lived up the street from us. You see, my mother had a job in one of the local factories, and she earned pretty good paper. She earned enough paper that we always had our own house, our own car. We always had food and nice clothes and a couple other things we might want. The lights were always on. The heat was always on in the winter. And so we had pretty much everything that we needed, physically anyway. But I don't know if I mentioned earlier, my father was a no-show. So he wasn't there, even though I learned later in life that I probably made out better because he wasn't there. So not sure what that might say about the type of man my father was. But at any rate, because my mom had to leave me at the neighbor's house or at the cousin's house for care while she went to work, I was basically vulnerable. And as a result, I became the victim of several sexual assaults before the age of 4 or 5 years old. So, mind you, I couldn't articulate what had happened to me. I had really no idea what happened to me. But I think on a cellular and an emotional level, I knew that something wrong had happened. I knew that I had been violated, but I was unable to articulate it. So, as I began growing up, I started acting out. I did many types of devious things like throwing rocks at cars and playing with fire and showing interest in sex before I was like 7 or 8 years old. I did all types of things. I got into fights and, stole from the stores, lied to my mom and other adults, stole from other adults and other children. So I was just acting out. The people in my life probably just considered me as a bad child, a corrupted seed, but no one understood that these behaviors was really a attempt to cry out that I was hurt and that I needed help from these violations that occurred to me at a young age. But mind you, I didn't know this either at that age. I was just a boy. And it wasn't until years later that I started to put the pieces together to understand the types of behavior that I used to display as a young child. But as I was growing up, engaging in these behaviors, we also lived in a fairly decent neighborhood. But over time, the neighborhood started to change. Drugs were starting to trickle in to the neighborhood. More violence was starting to show up. Starting to see more winos on the street, more drug addicts on the street, more prostitution on the street, all the things that someone who wants to raise a healthy family don't want their people, their children themselves exposed to. So just around the time when the crack epidemic was starting to proliferate or starting to take off, my mother sold our house. I was about 13, 12 at this time, had been involved in neighborhood sports, thought I was cool, had a Jerry curl, etc., etc. Well, she sold our house and we moved out to the suburbs. She said she wanted to move because she wanted to save me from the growing negative influences that were starting to show up in our neighborhood. All those things and more that I had mentioned earlier. But little did she know, or maybe she did know, that I had already been corrupted. I was really interested and enamored by the things that were happening in the street, from the gun boys, the knife boys, the gang members, the pimps, the prostitutes, the things that were happening in the bars up around the way, the loud music, the sweet smell of marijuana, though I didn't even really understand what it was. But it was these things that grabbed my attention. Not to mention, I think they were reinforced by all of the negative stereotypes that the media and the community were portraying of what it meant to be a black boy coming of age. But in the midst of all that, before we moved, my mother did her best. She sent me to urban, suburban schools out in the suburbs where I was one of few black children in some of these school districts or in some of these schools. She put me into special programs, music, sports. When I was younger, she would take me to the YMCA. So she did her best. But I think the biggest thing missing in my upbringing was the fact that I did not have a consistent source of guidance and advice that would help me develop a sense of discipline that I needed. And so as a result, as I said earlier, I fell in love with what the streets were offering. I thought that this was the way a black boy or a black man should really conduct themselves. Though one of my uncles was an attorney, though another one of my uncles was a pastor, my brothers were college students. They were never involved in this stuff. So none of this stuff never happened up close and personal for me. But I saw it at a distance. I saw it and heard it as I rode my bike through the neighborhood before we moved. So by the time that we moved, all of these things were brewing inside of me. And it was these things that I guess were nurtured more so than any of the other, say, positive qualities that you might want to see or hear or instill in a child. So by the time we got to the suburbs, I was already on some bullshit. straight up and down. So when I saw other young black boys my age who were studious, who were well spoken, who were well behaved, in my mind, I was thinking, they're soft. They're not legitimate black boys or legitimate black men. They're trying to be white, or they're white boys with black skin. All of this misinformation, all of this misunderstanding, all of this ignorance I carried with me. Probably perhaps because I had never really shared it with a whole lot of people outside of other guys my age group when I was growing up. And so there were no adults really that countered this type of narrative. Again, because maybe I didn't let it be known that this is what I was thinking or this is how I misunderstood the world. I'm not sure. But at any rate, we get to the suburbs. I begin middle school, eighth grade, ninth grade. Around ninth grade, I start dibbling and dabbling with alcohol. 10th grade, I'm dibbling and dabbling with alcohol and cannabis or marijuana. Come 11th grade, I'm messing with cocaine, alcohol, marijuana, and I discontinued playing sports because when I first moved to the suburbs, one of the first things I did was I joined the football team. I joined the CYO Catholic Youth Organization basketball team, track and field. I had joined the boxing club, but that wasn't in the suburbs. I had to go back down into the community. It was called St. Martin's Boxing Club. So I was into athletics. I wasn't that good, but that's what I did. But as the years moved by and I continued to dibble and dabble with drugs and alcohol, there became more of a gap between me and athleticism, me and doing what's right. And so eventually, what happened is I began committing crimes to get money to buy drugs. My mother used to give me a little $5, $10 a week. Back then, that was enough money to buy lunch throughout the week. But I wanted to get high. I wanted to drink, and it took money to do that. And so I did things that were illegal to get money to pay for my get high. I'm not proud of that. I'm not happy about that, but that's what was happening. And so again, I fell into another hole. I became attracted to something that was not healthy for me, but I wanted to do it and I knew that it took money. So I began breaking the law to make sure that I could do that. Around 12th grade, my girlfriend and I get pregnant with a child. I was dating a white girl from the same suburban town that we had moved to. Her parents didn't like the fact that she was dating me, this black dude. Not to mention, they probably could see, because they were adults, they probably could see that I was pretty much a jerk and I wasn't a healthy kid. I was doing things that were not good for their daughter, but their daughter didn't see it. And perhaps I was quite persuasive, but at any rate, she and I got pregnant. She wanted to get married after high school. She wanted to go to college. I was supposed to go to the Marines. And just before I was supposed to go to the Marines, I got arrested. I think it was for an assault charge. Marines didn't want to take me after that. So I went to the Navy instead. Went to Naval Boot Camp, but I did not complete. I did not want to really be in the Navy, but I had signed up for the Marines first and then the Navy because I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do after high school. 12th grade came, other people were going to college, other people were going off into the world of work. I hadn't prepared for any of this. 12th grade came and ended. My girlfriend was pregnant. We were expecting a child. and I had no means of creating or no ideal of creating a future for myself. So, like I said, Marines, doors shut, bam. Went to the Navy, wasn't really happy about it, didn't want to do it. So I dropped out of boot camp, came back home. Girlfriend's upset with me. Her parents are even more skeptical of me, and I'm lost and confused. So I fall back into getting high, fall back into throwing bricks, basically doing things that were illegal to get extra money. I was working a little job in construction and just hanging out and just doing all kind of dumb shit. But what ultimately happened for me one night was that I think it was my birthday. I think it was going on my 19th birthday. Me and my girlfriend were on the outs. Some of my friends were gone away to college. The other group of my friends were going to boot camp. They hadn't made it to the Marines. And strange thing about them going to the Marines was that, if I'm not mistaken, I came up with the idea of the Marines. I started talking to them about the Marines, and I think all of them got on the bandwagon. It's like, yeah, we might as well go too, because they didn't have any idea probably of what they wanted to do, but they weren't as deep in the sauce as I was, so to speak. They probably didn't have the same traumas as me, and they weren't doing some of the same stuff as me, so they weren't at as high of a risk. So they went to boot camp. They made it through boot camp, and those brothers did 4 years in the Marines. At least three of them, bomb, bomb, bomb. Yeah, three of them went to the Marines. Two of them went to college. I went to prison. I went to prison because one night, as I said, it was about my birthday, my 19th birthday. I figured I'm just gonna go get high by myself. I'm gonna go buy some weed. I'm gonna buy some cocaine. I'm gonna buy some alcohol, probably a 40 ounce of OE or something. I'm not sure. And I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna drink. I'm gonna smoke. I'm gonna watch some TV, eat some food, and just go to sleep, pass out, whatever. And that'll be me celebrating my birthday. That's just how bass backwards I was thinking. Maybe just how confused I was. But at any rate, I go and I buy my weed, I buy my brew, then I go and I buy some cocaine. When I'm buying the cocaine, I run into this girl at the cocaine spot. And she has a guy with her. We all talking. Um, she wants to get with me, want to do some things sexually for me in exchange for some of my cocaine. The guy says he'll come along too. He'll buy some cocaine, which he did, but I bought the bulk of the cocaine. We went, we hung out, we got high. Once all the cocaine was gone, all the weed was gone, all the alcohol was gone, they wanted me to buy some more. I refused to buy some more, so we jumped in the car and we started to head back to their place where I could just drop them off because I was driving and I picked them up in my car, et cetera, et cetera. But at any rate, as we're driving, we start arguing about money, about cocaine, about the get high and how I spent more money than them. And, I didn't get what I wanted, which was some sexual favors from this girl. And so finally, I pulled over my car. And I was like, y'all get out my car, get the hell out my car. And I went and I dragged the girl out the car. I got out and I opened the passenger side, pulled her out the car because she was sitting in the front. And me and her started fighting and arguing, pushing and shoving. Then the dude gets out the car and he starts fighting and pushing and shoving. He takes a swing at me. He misses, or he may have clipped me. I can't really remember. So me and him start fighting. Then the girl jumps on me, and we're all three of us fighting. And then I think it was the girl who pulled out a knife, and she swipes at me with the knife, barely misses me. I take the knife from her, I stab her, I stab the dude take off running. I stabbed her a few more times, then I jumped in my car and I took off. About a week later, police show up at my door. I'm arrested, I'm taken downtown, I'm put in a lineup, I'm identified by the girl as the person who stabbed her. I don't know where the dude is at. Never heard from him. Got charged with a violent assault but never got charged for hurting two people, just one person. Got sentenced to 4 to 12 years. But before I was sentenced to 4 to 12 years, I was facing eight and a third to 25. Judge was going to give me eight and a third to 25. My lawyer said, well, look, you can take it to trial, but if you blow trial, you might get 25, you might get 12 and a half. So what do you want to do? So they go back, I get this plea for 4 to 12 years. So I accept the 4 to 12 years. My lawyer's telling me after 4 years, you'll probably get out, yada, yada, yada. You can still, live your life. I was 19. So I figured I'd get out of be about 23, maybe 24. But it didn't work out like that. I ultimately ended up serving 8 years on a 4 to 12. So I was in prison from the time I was 19 until I turned 27, almost 30. When they first took me to the state penitentiary from the county jail, I was scared as hell. I heard all the noise. I saw the big walls, the iron gates and bars, the fence with the barbed wire. But I couldn't let nobody know how scared I was. I was really shaking in my boots. And then when you get inside the place, I already had a bald head. So they shaved everybody's head, shaved everybody's face. Then they did strip searches, take off all your clothes, lift up your genitals, bend over, open your butt cheeks, the bottom of your feet, run your fingers through your mouth. Just very dehumanizing. I think that was the worst part of being in prison. Well, then, so I'm in prison and I'm thinking to myself, well, damn, what am I going to do now? I'm here. I knew I had to do at least 4 years. I knew I couldn't fight my way, tough guy my way through prison because I knew somebody else in there was probably tougher than me, probably harder than me. And it was then that I realized I'm not really tough. I'm not really hard. All my life, I've been doing crazy stuff because I've been angry. All my life, I've been doing crazy stuff because I've been afraid. I've been doing this stuff to keep people at bay. I've been doing this stuff, all this crazy stuff, so I didn't have to look at my emotional self. But I didn't even realize it. But what happened was I was in the cell and I started asking myself, how did I end up here? How did I let myself get to this low point in my life? And I answered myself back internally. People say, well, something said. That something was my conscious mind, that part of me that was no longer high, that was no longer sedated by drugs and alcohol. And it said to me, it's your thinking that got you here, yo. And at the same time, it told me, but it's your thinking that could get you out of here too. That blew me away. So I really started asking myself, what about my thinking? How did my thinking get like this? And I couldn't lie to myself. It wouldn't do me any good. So I really started just peeling back the layers of my life, the events of my life, and looking at the things that happened to me, the things that I did, and how I ended up in this low place. And so I realized that because I was thinking in such on a low frequency, I could do things to raise my thinking frequency, so to speak, that would ultimately begin to dictate or change how I behaved. And so I started doing things like reading about people who had been in some very tough predicaments, reading about people who changed their lives. And one of the books that I read that really changed my life and changed my outlook about myself was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I didn't want to be like Malcolm, but I realized that Malcolm educated his mind because he was always smart. And I think that for me, I was always smart because growing up, people used to always tell me, man, you're a smart kid, but you're acting up. You're not doing the right things. So I connected with Malcolm's story on that level, having some intelligence. And probably all of us have it. There's no probably about it. All of us do have intelligence in one area or another. No one is not intelligent. There's sometimes people haven't developed their intelligence. And same with me, I hadn't developed my intelligence that would help give me in other people's life. So reading Malcolm's story, reading Nathan McCall's story makes me want to holler. Um, Reading Mandela's story. There were so many different stories I read. Sojourner Truth's story, and then I started reading about Egyptology and ancient African civilizations and started to realize that these were the people who laid the foundations of Earth or of civilization on earth. They laid the foundations of math and science and astronomy and so many different schools of thinking and philosophies that we use today. They were the progenitors, they were the originators. And so that told me or gave me the idea that if these black people, these ancient black people who were here first, that I came from, did these things, set the foundations of math and science and reading and all this for the earth, then that potential was within me. So I began to tap deeper, deeper into bringing that part of myself forward. What the ancients would call educerating, from which the word educate come from, which is to bring forth that which is latent. So I was starting to really become educated because I began to learn about myself, learn about my potential, learn about the people that looked like me that came long before me. And then one of the things that also really helped me understand my potential and my ability was when I started really reading about the transatlantic slave trade and how enslaved Africans were brought over here in the halls, over here, meaning the United States of America. They were brought here in the halls of ships as captives of war and enslaved. But during that journey from Africa to the Americas, Africa to the Caribbean islands, in the bottoms, in the halls of ships, thousands of them died in that transition. But at the same time, thousands survived. Probably more died than survived. But of those who survived, I am their offspring. So, in order to have survived that voyage and to have survived all of the difficulties that Black people have faced in this country up to this very day, the folks had to be very strong. And I came from those people. So, again, I realized that I am much more than I ever believed I was. I am much more than the trauma that occurred earlier in my life had tried to reduce me to thinking about myself and my potential. Because for many years, I had low self esteem. For many years, I was ashamed and embarrassed about what had happened to me when I was a baby. And I think in many ways that prevented me from reaching my fullness, reaching for my potential. But one of the biggest things that I think I really did while I was in prison that really started to propel me to the next level is I started taking college courses. These college courses were credit bearing and they would allow me to earn an associate's degree from Damon College. Yeah, Damon College typically does not give out associate's degrees, but this was a special in prison college academic program that provided associate's degrees for those who cut the mustard, so to speak. And so I enrolled in the program. I was a dead serious student. I fell in love with the professors. I became a college clerk. I also became a teacher of sorts. What do you call it? An assistant to the teacher who was It was a teacher's aide was the title, actually, an assistant to the teacher who was providing other incarcerated men um, instruction on training to earn their general equivalency diploma or their GED because they had not completed high school. And while I was the teacher's aide, I realized that the teacher was not invested in this class, and lots of men were not learning. When they went to the teacher would just say, "Well, read the book," or "Go ask Johnny because Johnny is on chapter 12 while you're on chapter 4." And so I took it upon myself to begin drawing up lesson plans in the class as the teacher's aide. And like I said, I was drawing up lesson plans while I was also the college level clerk. But long story short, it was the academics that really started to season my mind, or like a farmer tilling a field, the academic activities were starting to turn over the soil of my brain, turn over the stagnant or the fallow ground of my cognitive self, and it began to prepare my mind to be even that much more receptive to new ideals and imagery about who I am, what I can become, and what I can add on to this world. And so going through the college program, I decided that when I get out, I'm going to go back to college and I'm going to get a 4-year degree. And people that I told this to while I was inside, they would laugh at me and tell me, "You ain't going to college. You coming right back here with the rest of us. Who do you think you are? What do you think you're going to do? Ha ha ha." So I'm just like, "Yep, okay." And so it finally came time for me to get released. I had gone to two parole boards. I did 4 years and I hit with 2 years. I came back after 6 years and I hit with 2 more years. I came back, there was 8 years. They had to let me go on conditional release. So now the time comes for me to go. I have this plan for myself to work, to go to school. I had a community of people outside waiting to help me. They had been riding with me my whole bid, basically my mother, my brothers, my sister, some of my cousins, some of my friends, those same guys that I mentioned that went to the Marines, and my mother's church family. So I had a nice support network. Got out, I lived with my sister. Eventually, my brother put me up in an apartment in a house that he owned. And after I think like 3 years on parole, I bought the house from my brother. I worked a bunch of temporary jobs. And eventually, I enrolled in college. Then I violated parole. I got sent back for 6 months. I got out after about another year. I re enrolled in college. Well, let me back up. Once I got out, I got off parole like maybe 3 months later, re-enrolled in college after a year had passed, um, and eventually earned a bachelor's degree from the State University in New York at Brockport College. Earned a bachelor's degree in health science. Then I went back to school and earned a master's degree in mental health counseling. And the whole time, I was really doing this because I enjoy academic exercises. And not to mention, the science shows that people who go to college or who complete academic or vocational training and get certified or licensed, they have a lower chance of going back to prison, what we call recidivism. And so I was also doing this because I was running for my life. I did not want to go back to prison or jail. You know, prison hurts a lot. It hurts emotionally, it hurts psychologically, and it could also hurt physically. I was fortunate enough to never get stabbed or beat up or anything like that while I was in prison. And it also hurts the people that love you. And so I had a lot of reasons not to go back to prison. Plus, I wanted to reconnect with my daughter. Unfortunately, that never happened. You know, at the time that I am recording this session, my daughter is now 33. She'll be 34 this year. And I think she just got married this past weekend. I wasn't informed, I wasn't invited. So that's one of the things that I really lost is a relationship with my daughter, you know. But at any rate, I'm still living my best life. So I get out of prison in 97. 2005, I get a bachelor's degree. 2010, I get a master's degree in mental health counseling. Um, 2017, I earned a doctorate degree in education. And in between all of that, I got married. Got married to a beautiful woman from Pakistan. That was in 2007. And during that time, we had two children. So we have two sons. One is age 10, one is age 15. And I'm mentioning all of this because these are the things that really helped to give me roots, that gave me foundation, that really um, gave me a reason to live and helped protect me from doing stupid stuff that would send me back to prison, or that would send me out in the streets, or allow me to go out in the streets and do something stupid and get killed or something. So this is what all these things I just mentioned, school and family, um, and other things of the sort, are what they call protective factors. And so, I developed these protective factors. One, because I knew I wanted something um, greater for myself, and two, I did not want to go back to prison. So I spent a lot of time teaching in junior college, as well as at the university that I graduated from as an adjunct. I worked as a substance abuse counselor, serving the same group of people at the same institution that I was mandated to go to when I was on parole. So the same group of people I'm talking about were men and women who were on parole. I worked as a substance abuse counselor for them at the same place that I was mandated to go to when I was on parole. I worked as a reentry case manager. Um, and those things just really helped me. And as I also said, I worked in higher education. So eventually, my wife and I, we got to the point where we wanted to move. And so we left Rochester and we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm currently working for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a postdoc fellow, where we are researching the intersection of health and mass incarceration. But if I could back up a little bit, um, and go back to when I first got out of prison, and maybe for the first 3 years, I think, one of the biggest obstacles I faced, and I think this is important that I mention it, one of the biggest obstacles I faced was the discrimination that people had against me because I had this felony conviction. Doors were slammed in my face so many times. People laughed at me. People had rude things to say about me. Um, People thought lesser of me, and they told me so to my face. But I didn't give up on myself. I think it's important that I share this. This is why I wanted to back up. So, for anyone who's listening, anyone who's about to get out of prison, anyone who has gotten out of prison, who is trying to find their way, I encourage you, don't give up the fight. Keep pushing. But one of the things that helps to even the ground is if you can get your certifications up, if you can get your license up, if you can get your degrees up, if you can get trained in a profession that you really love. Once you have those credentials, it makes it that much easier for you to knock doors down. Because one of the arguments is that, look, I worked hard to change my life. I worked hard to get this certification. I worked hard to get these credentials because I'm not going back to prison. How many people do you know or know of that have been to prison that have earned same similar credentials? Probably not many. So, my parting words to you is don't give up the fight. Seek out good support, solid support, and believe in yourself. And eventually, you'll find yourself back in a position where I think you want to be. It may take you 5 years, it may take you 4 years, but that time that it takes you to work up and get to that level where you want to be beats another 2, 3, 4, 10 years, or however many years in the penitentiary. So thank you for listening. That's my story from prison to promise. If you or someone you know would like to share their story on this show, or if you'd like to leave a comment or a suggestion, drop me a line at lowercase DrCraigWaleed, D as in David, at gmail.com. That's Dr. Craig Waleed at gmail.com. Thank you. Peace.